Kristin Neff. Welcome to Roll with the Punches.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's fair to say I'm thrilled to have you on the show, and it's fair to say a lot of my listeners are going to be thrilled as well, because your name, when I run coaching sessions and more so coaching programs, your name gets bandied around much of the time, as it does when I'm in therapy.
Nice.
She's like, oh, that's awkward. So you, just for everyone listening, I will do a formal introduction that will be tacked onto the front of this, but you are the guru of self-compassion, which to some people sounds fluffy and to some people sounds like the hardest thing in the world. Tell me a little bit about how you even, where did it start for you?
Yeah. Well, so it started with me with the personal practice. I certainly didn't come up with the idea. It was my last year of graduate school, and I was just gotten divorced. I was in a pretty low point in my life and feeling a lot of stress. So I learned mindfulness meditation for my stress. But luckily, the people teaching mindfulness meditation taught in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Zen teacher, who always talked about self-compassion. So way before I figured out this whole meditation thing, I kind of got the idea that you could intentionally bring compassion to yourself. So compassion, in the Latin, passion to suffer, come with. In other words, being with your suffering in a supportive way, in a friendly way. In other words, being there for yourself, supporting yourself, giving yourself the resources you need, understanding, kindness, encouragement, warmth. Just like we treat a good friend naturally, we usually don't think of doing that with ourselves. So I tried it with myself, and I was just so amazed at the immediate difference it made in my ability to cope. So my little contribution was later I started doing research on it and then figured out a way to teach it. So, but it's an ancient idea.
Yeah. I've never heard the it being framed with being with your suffering. That landed.
Yeah, by definition, right? Compassion's only aimed at suffering, but the suffering is what gets us into trouble, right? That can spiral us into depression or anxiety or, real burnout or grief. And so how we're with the tough stuff, whether that's in our life, challenges, cancer, the difficulties going on in our environment, in our relationships, or very often with ourselves, we feel inadequate, we don't feel good enough in some way, which is a lot of our suffering comes from feelings of inadequacy. So how we're with that, again, are we with ourselves like we would be with a friend? Do we listen? Are we there for ourselves? Are we supportive, encouraging, offering like wise, constructive criticism? I mean, if you think about it, would you ever say to your friend what you say to yourself, like, you stupid loser? You wouldn't have any friends if you did, right? And also you would immediately know it would be counterproductive. That's not going to help your friend. That's not going to motivate your friend, calling your friend a stupid loser. And yet somehow we think with ourselves it's going to help us. It really doesn't. It does just the opposite.
Do you think that most people, or all people, or any people, have much awareness on the level of compassion or lack thereof? Do you think people actually are aware of how we are speaking to ourselves or the beliefs we hold about ourselves?
Yeah, I think it varies. Some people, it's just like this voice inside their head, they don't even notice. They're so used to it, they don't even notice how mean they're being to themselves or how cold they are to themselves. They just think it's natural. Other people do notice that they're very self-critical. Some people are aware that it's making things worse for them, but maybe don't believe that they can change or they have any ability to do anything differently. So that is one of the things in therapy. What we're finding actually, that it doesn't matter what approach you use in therapy. One of the things therapy does is teaches self-compassion, teaches people how to understand their patterns, what's causing their own suffering, how to be more supportive and helpful and resilient. So that, people who go to therapy usually have more awareness of their inner dialogue and whether or not it's helping or hurting them.
Yeah. When you did your self-experiment, did you find it easy, hard? How much self-awareness did you have, or was it a process of gaining self-awareness through that?
Yeah, so I was actually fortunate. It wasn't that difficult for me. I know some people struggle. I was lucky I had a good relationship with my mother. My basic feelings of security were already there. So for me, it was more just like I had never even considered that I could be warm and supportive. It just hadn't even really crossed my mind. And then when I tried it out, it actually wasn't that challenging for me. I saw a difference almost immediately. Some people it is more challenging, especially people maybe with parents who are really harsh or cruel or gave them the message that they weren't worthy of compassion. It can be more challenging. The good news is the research shows, especially with help, you can actually heal the pain of some of that early childhood trauma by giving yourself compassion for how hard it was, and giving yourself warmth, understanding, acceptance. Again, just like a friend who would just hold your hand and say, I'm so sorry you experienced that. We can actually say that to ourselves, and then things start to heal. So, it may go a little more slowly, but the good news is it's not esoteric. It's not some like really difficult thing. It's just most of us have learned how to be caring toward at least someone, our pets or good friends, or maybe our kids, or we've kind of learned the skill of how to be caring and supportive. Maybe not with everyone, but at least with some living beings. And so we already know how to do it. The trick is just giving ourselves permission and remembering to do it with ourselves.
Mm, mm. What is I guess I think about people's really early childhood experiences, and I've spoken to people before, and it always interests me how much that those really, really early years that we actually often can't remember at all can
Yes.
shape our ability to have psychological and emotional resilience. It can shape our understanding of the world, and I think for some of us it can take years to understand.
Yeah.
And how do we make up the ground for a time of our life that has shaped us, yet we likely cannot remember it?
Yeah. So, from my point of view, it's not necessary to understand exactly what happened or even understand what your patterns were or how they formed. It can be helpful, but if you don't know, it's what you do know is that you're hurting. What you might know is that you're engaging in behaviors that are harming yourself or others, and then so you can have feel compassion for that. In other words, feel moved by the fact that you're hurting. Um, a desire to help yourself in some way with warmth, with support, with encouragement. And by the way, there are two sides of self-compassion, just like there's two sides of being a parent: it's acceptance and change, right? So as a parent, we love our children unconditionally, hopefully, ideally, but we also want them to, achieve things. We want to help them achieve their dreams, go to school, be healthy, whatever it is they need to do. That's part of caring for someone. We don't want to accept all our children's behaviors if they're like 7 years old and not potty trained. Well, it's a problem, things like that. So the same thing with ourselves. So we can accept ourselves and the fact that we're flawed and we're doing the best we can, and we can give ourselves warmth and support. But we also do want to make changes if we're in a situation that's unhealthy or harming us, or engaged in behaviors that are unhealthy or harmful. It's not compassionate to accept those situations or behaviors. It's compassionate to be brave and take a risk and make a change, do something different. A lot of people get a little confused about that. They think it's only about acceptance, and that's half the story. We can accept ourselves as people unconditionally, but we want to change and help ourselves with kindness, warmth, encouragement. We want to help ourselves make changes that are going to lead to more health and well-being.
One thing that I often talk about with the people I coach, my background is essentially comes out of the fitness and sporting and athlete space. But my interest lies more in the metaphors that live within that, and the psychology and the mindsets, and playing in that space, and then seeing how life evolves outside of it and what we can learn from ourselves.
Yeah.
So a lot of people who come to me have an interest in both and can very much be in that physical, I want to be better, be fitter, be healthier. So they're coming from that standpoint. And a thing that we're often talking about working out and moving our bodies and treating ourselves well and getting healthy. And one concept that I talk about a lot is the idea around needing to understand when we need to kick our own butt and when we need to exercise self-compassion, and the idea that really no one else can know that but you. And learn it, and it's a process of figuring it out along the way. And I'm sure not just in the physical exercise space, but in the trauma space or the life space or the behavior change space, that's relevant. Are there practices? Is there a way of shortcutting or understanding ourselves?
Yeah, so I would have a slight disagreement that the choice is between either kicking our butts or being self-compassionate, because sometimes the most self-compassionate thing to do is to kick our butts, right? So in other words, self-compassion isn't just about, not doing something or going easy on yourself. So for instance, we just taught my dissertation student, and we're trying to publish the study now. We developed a self-compassion training for top level NCAA collegiate athletes, right? People who, they have to be the best, like, their future careers are riding on it. So they're always wanting to learn. They're always wanting to, go that extra mile. And they benefited tremendously from self-compassion. In fact, their performance improved. Why? Because when you're compassionate, maybe it is the right thing to kick your own butt, in the sense that you really want to get out there. You want to double down, maybe you want to improve your routine or training program or whatever it is. You really want to go that extra mile. If that's important to you, compassion is going to try to help you reach your goal. Here's the difference. It means that your worth isn't contingent on reaching your goal. You want to reach the goal because you care. But if you don't, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. And what this does is very, very important, because part of training and part of being a top level athlete or business person, whatever, is failure. Failure is part of the learning process. This is the only way we learn. And so how do you react in those failure moments? You say, oh, I didn't make that goal, or I lost the game. Therefore, I'm a failure. And if you do that, if you shame yourself, it's going to give you anxiety, and it's going to actually undermine your ability to learn and grow and learn what you need to do to improve. So we taught athletes how to use self-compassion as a learning strategy. Okay, well, I failed. That's okay. It doesn't mean I'm a failure, but because I care, how can I improve my game? So you're moving the success away from being an evaluation of self-worth. You're just coming from a place of, like, a really good supportive coach. They want you to be your best, but they don't hate you if you mess up, and they're the ones who are able to tell you what do you need to change to improve. And that's compassionate. If your goal is, if you care about, being a top level athlete, it's compassionate to say, this is what I need to do different. So it's really not a matter of what you do, it's how you do it. And then when you do it with a more encouraging, friendly, sometimes it might be tough love, but loving, like genuinely loving. I love you no matter what, but I think that you could really try harder. That's actually, that's going to help. It's not going to undermine you at all.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think of different styles of coaches in the art of boxing specifically. I'll think of that. It's an easy one to kind of talk about and to get the concept of, and how different coaching methods. I really love a tough love type of coach. However, I also not just that. Like, there is a deeper level to it. So I respond to a level of that. But underneath that, there needs to be a real respect and understanding for when to apply and how. And over the years, I've watched different athletes train with different coaching styles. And I've seen the same coach treat athletes almost similar. But it's the narrative of the athlete. It's the relationship's response to that treatment. And in that case, in that tough love case, it can be what I think is extremely detrimental to the person, and it almost, and it's funny because it's made me over the years reflect and go, I try to be really self-aware, and I go, hang on, is my relationship with this style of coaching healthy? Because if I look at somebody else with that coaching method and go, I don't feel like that's healthy for them, is it healthy for me, or am I engaging in something that is not self-compassionate? It's really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, the definition of self-compassion is what alleviates suffering. So if it's working for you and it's not harmful, then it can be self-compassionate. But if it is harmful, by definition, it's not self-compassionate. Right? So it kind of depends. Each person's different. But I think parenting is such a good example. If you want your kid to comply, threatening to punish them, calling them names, being harsh, you're going to get quicker short-term compliance. But in the long term, you're going to undermine your kids' ability to do their best because they aren't going to be self-confident. They're going to have a lot of anxiety. They'll develop fear of failure. They'll have insecure attachment. It'll come out in other ways that are detrimental, right? But if you're like really encouraging to your child, you also may be very strict, have very high standards, really want the best for them. But if they know that the bottom line is they are okay, even if their performance isn't. So as an athlete, maybe your performance isn't okay, and you could be pretty tough on the performance. But if you feel like that coach respects you as a human being, then you have your sense of your self-worth isn't contingent on performance. And that actually helps you focus more on the performance, because the second shame is activated, shame shuts down your ability to learn.
Yeah.
When you're flooded with all these emotions and self-doubts, it's actually not helpful. It's counterproductive.
What about when we are raised or we live a life where toxicity is the familiar thing? So our interpretation of our environment is this works for me, or we're drawn to, so there's a level of comfort in discomfort. You think about toxic relationships, violence. For me, there was a resonance in the boxing ring, in that environment, that activated fight or flight, that activated isolation, that kept me safe in the needing to protect myself. There were a bunch of things that were initially, I think, they fit with me because of these not so great reasons, but in the playing in that space, I was able to turn them into really empowering things. Some people are stepping into environments, I think of people who struggle in relationships, as do I, but people who want relationships and keep finding themselves in the same unavailable or maybe violent relationships, and in their experience, that feels like the thing that they want or need. So how do we work through that? How do we gain a new level of something?
Yeah, so an important part of compassion is wisdom, right? So compassion is kind of the ability to see all the complex causes and conditions that lead for things to unfold as they do, which allows us to be more understanding, right? So when we have compassion for someone, we may understand, oh, I see, well, there's a lot of stuff going on that led that person to act as they did. We do that for ourselves as well. So what compassion does is, it's not gonna, you still have to figure it out. It doesn't mean you still have to do your work. It could be helpful to do therapy. It can be helpful to be self-reflective. But compassion is going to give you the sense of safety you needed to really explore. If you can see yourself clearly, see your history clearly because you have your own back, it's going to help you unravel and understand things better than, again, if you're afraid that either you'll shame yourself, or you're afraid of being a horrible person or a worthless person, or you're going to judge yourself, you're going to shut yourself down, right? It's actually going to be counterproductive. So, how do I put this? Self-compassion can't provide all the answers, but it provides the optimal environment for asking the questions, right? And really also achieving your goals, the same thing as well. It can't make you achieve your goals, but it provides the optimal emotional environment for achieving your goals. It's just like a healthy family. It's kind of like being a healthy parent to yourself. Parents, we can't control our kids. Kids, they've got their own volition. There's a lot of things involved. But if we provide the optimally supportive, kind, caring, encouraging, supportive environment for them, they're going to have their best chance to be their best self. Well, it's really the same thing with us, right? So in other words, understanding what's happening, understanding who we are, understanding why we have the patterns we do, understanding changes we want to make. All of that's going to be much easier when you're coming from a warm, supportive, encouraging place, as opposed to that feeling of I'm not good enough. Right? There's something wrong with me. If you say something's wrong with me, I need to figure it out, that's going to put a whole burden on you. But if you say, hey, I'm a human being, all people have struggles, all people have challenges, how can I work through this in a way that helps? Because I, like all human beings, are worthy of compassion and support. I mean, it's not like when a baby is born, we think, okay, I'll be compassionate to that baby once they get a graduate degree. The moment that baby's breathing, there's this natural instinct to help, to support. It's kind of just part of being human. But we forget that because our culture tells us, no, actually our worth isn't from being human. Our worth is through achievement or looking a certain way. Culture sells us a bill of goods. Self-compassion says that's not true. I am intrinsically worthy just because I'm a human being, living, breathing, aware, doing the best I can moment to moment. That's where my worth lies. I don't have to earn it. It's intrinsic to who I am.
What percentage of people, not that you probably know all the stats of the questions I'm going to ask, but I mean, I'm just thinking about how many people do you think are innately have a sense of being enough if they were to either be asked or really deeply sit with themselves and think about it? Do you think that any of us really feel enough overall?
Well, see, a lot of this depends, what are you basing that judgment of enough on? Is it external validation? Is it set markers? Is it achievements? In terms of being enough, worthy of love and care. Yeah, so maybe it's not enough in terms of what you want to accomplish with your life, but your worth as a person, your worthiness of kindness, warmth, support, care, it's not contingent on what you achieve or how you look or how popular you are, right? It's kind of this unconditional warmth, care, support, like hopefully a parent has for their child. And that's what we can actually cultivate with ourselves. So it's not even like we have to believe something. It's not like, yes, I am someone who I'm not. No, you might be a mess. We talk about the goal of practice is simply to be a compassionate mess. You'll still be a mess. We're all a mess. We're a mess in our own way. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses and challenges, their own life story, their own history, their own, where they're going in life. But can you bring compassion to that mess? Warmth, kindness, care, support, encouragement. Sometimes some mama bear tough love if that's what's needed. That's what's going to help. Yeah. And so your focus shifts from the question, am I enough, to how can I help? It's a very different mindset, and it's not one that, it's interesting. Is it natural? So yes and no. So we know that both self-criticism and compassion are natural, evolved responses. But compassion actually evolved towards others. So, evolutionarily, we have parents who have compassion, they care about their kids. Those kids are more likely to pass their genes on to future generations. Group members who care about each other, help each other, have that sense of altruism, support. Those groups are more likely to survive and pass their genes on. But basically, from our genes' point of view, it's more helping others. From our own point of view, when we feel threatened, instead of going into the compassion response, it actually feels a little more natural to go into fight, flight, or freeze response. When we feel threatened, that's a very natural reaction. We release cortisol, amygdala gets triggered, we're ready to fight the danger. But when the danger is ourselves, because we feel we've fallen short in some way, we're inadequate, we beat ourselves up, we fight ourselves, we think it'll keep us safe. Either will force us to change, or maybe blunt the blow of other people. If I say it first, it won't be so hard if other people think it. We flee into a sense of isolation, like we're running away from the perceived judgments of others, into shame and isolation. Or we freeze and get stuck. We just get immobilized, and that's when we could just turn things over and over in our head. It's a natural safety response that, again, it's evolved, but it's actually not that helpful, unfortunately. So we are doing a little bit of a hack. We're tapping into the compassion system, which evolved to care for others, and we're making a U-turn, and we're using it with ourselves. And it's actually turns out to be more effective.
So it feels like a case of, oh, it wasn't necessarily all those years ago when life was about just not getting eaten by a lion and finding some food with your tribe that was small and lived
Right.
where it lived all together in a, you know, in a community. It wasn't a necessary thing because we had the compassion of others, because we had that connection. And I feel like the more, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, the more our life has become independent and disconnected and goal focused, we've need to evolve something that maybe wasn't so much a necessity back then. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, so I suppose I don't know how comfortable I would be saying that it wasn't necessary or it even wasn't around back then. We don't know, right?
Yeah.
So, for instance, I've had the privilege of spending some time with San hunter gatherers in Botswana, who they think is one of the
Oh,
world's oldest cultures. They're pretty self compassionate people,
you're right.
you know. So I think in many ways this lack of self compassion seemed to come from the modern era, industrialization, when we started owning things and acquiring things, and
Mm.
things became more external as opposed to just natural internal.
Mm.
So I'm not sure how to answer that question. Was it
Mm.
necessary or not? But what I do know is that now it's not very helpful. Not that sometimes we do need that fight, flight, or freeze instinct if we want to save ourselves or there really is a threat. But more often than not, we feel threatened by something that is actually not threatening our lives. It's just a threat to our self-concept.
Yes.
And so we get anxiety, we get depression, we feel shame, all these things which actually aren't helpful to our survival. They work against it. They make it harder for us to achieve our goals and be happy.
Mm.
Yeah, and what do we really want? We want to feel love. We want to belong. And self-compassion can help us feel that love and feel that belonging. It comes from the inside, not only just from the outside.
It's so true. It must have been on my mind this week because I was just looking for a quote that I wrote up and shared the other day. It was, my circumstances are far less problematic than my attachment to my circumstances. And I was thinking about, you know, this long-standing thing that I'm going through, and at different times over the last couple of years I've had vastly different feelings about the outcome of it and where I am in the middle of it, which have gone from it's fine, whatever happens, I'm good, to and these aren't reflective of what is happening in the moment, which intrigues me. I go, how come sometimes when things are the most frightening, when things first come up and you go, oh, this is 10 out of 10 devastation potential,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And then when it doesn't hit a 10 out of 10, it's almost like I found myself, it goes back up to a 5, and I find myself with more anxiety about it, or more my thoughts getting away on me. And I have to rein that in and go, okay, we have to deliberately have perspective here. Why do we focus on things differently? The same thing has a different story at different times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge how our reactions they shape our reality. They shape what we think our reality is. So what starts to happen with self-compassion practice when you start to intentionally cultivate a kind, caring, warm, supportive attitude toward yourself, right? When you fail, when things are difficult, is over time you focus a little less on what's happening and you start to focus more on how are you relating to what's happening.
Yeah.
So when your mind is when your heart is full of compassion, you feel kindness, you feel connected to others, you feel very present with what is, you aren't turning away or fighting it. And there's a lot of satisfaction in feeling that love, that kindness, that connection, that presence. And even if circumstances are difficult in the moment, you can almost rest your awareness in the compassion that's relating to the difficulty, as opposed to being totally carried away by what's happening. Because we don't have a lot of control about what's happening. We can do a little bit, but not a whole lot. But we can intentionally cultivate a caring response to what's happening.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on affirmations? I did a whole episode on them quite a while ago and it landed well with people. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
We research says is positive affirmations work if you have high self-esteem, and they backfire if you have low self-esteem.
Oh, boom.
So if you already believe it, then affirming what you already think is true can actually be helpful. It's almost just like you're highlighting or focusing on these beliefs you have about yourself. But if you're doing it and you don't think it's true, like you're saying, like, I'm so smart, and you really fear that you aren't very smart or something like that, and actually the research shows it can be counterproductive because you're creating an argument in your head and you're creating tension and you feel inauthentic. So self-compassion is not positive affirmations, quite the opposite, in fact. So I talk a lot about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion. Self-compassion is, we're worthy even if we're flawed and we make mistakes. So we don't have to think positively about ourselves to have compassion. It's actually more, we think we're caring toward ourselves even when we are flawed and make mistakes or struggling. So self-esteem is more contingent, like the sense of worth is on being a certain way or having people like you or looking a certain way or having success. It's like it's a fair weather friend. It's there for you when you succeed. It's like positive affirmations. Yeah, they work when you're already feeling good about yourself. But what happens when you fall flat on your face? It's not there for you. Whereas compassion is a stable friend. And actually in research, we show that the sense of self-worth linked to compassion is more stable over time because it's there for you precisely when you fall down.
Yeah, I love that. I think of another thing I talk about in coaching, which is, saying to people, what we say we want isn't always what we want, and maybe we need to spend some time curious about whether I want what I say I want, or whether I'm saying that I want that to put in another thing that again proves to me that I'm unworthy and not enough. So if I say I need to lose weight or set this boundary or do this thing, and internally it's really just me going, here's another thing we'll fail at because we're not enough. And then there's this resistance against it, but we don't understand. It's not, I don't believe it's on a conscious level at all, but it is a question that I think about, which kind of lands with your idea around the affirmation. And
yeah. So I'm not going to say that they're harmful, but what they kind of set up is that they reinforce the idea that I need to be a certain way to be enough, or I need to be a certain way, I need to be beautiful or successful or whatever it is. So compassion, the bottom line is, no matter whether you succeed or fail, you're worthy of kindness and care. Again, it's a type of unconditional worth. It doesn't mean that you stop caring about achieving your goals, but it just, again, thinking of that ideal parent. An ideal parent loves their child unconditionally, whether they succeed or fail. But because they care, they're going to try to help their child succeed and do it in effective ways. They're going to put time and energy and effort into helping their child succeed. But the bottom line is, I love you either way. Yeah, and that rock solid sense of self-worth, of stability, that I am enough, actually gives you the emotional resources you need to keep going, especially when times are challenging.
Can we heal our relationship with ourselves, and can we practice self-compassion in the middle of toxic environments and relationships, or does it need to both shift?
Yeah, so I sometimes talk about the difference between fierce and tender self-compassion. So tender self-compassion is the aspect of compassion that's about unconditional acceptance. Like I said, no matter what, we're still enough. Kind of accepting of sometimes our emotions are painful. That's just, we don't resist that. It's like, okay, that's part of life. And kind of open to that with kindness and support. But fierce self-compassion is, how do I alleviate my suffering through taking action, right? And the actions are more aimed at either behaviors or situations. Right? So if I'm doing something that's harming me, or that's toxic or unhealthy, like maybe I've got some addiction issues or something like that, even though I'm enough, I don't want to accept the behaviors because they're harmful, or situations. So in other words, drawing boundaries is a really important part of self-compassion. I'm trying to say, maybe this relationship isn't good for me. Maybe I need to make a change because it's causing me suffering. And because I care, I'm going to try to make a change. So it's really both. It's always both. It's like yin and yang. We need both in balance all the time. One without the other is incomplete.
Yeah, God, I love that. What are there a lot of, how many practices are there for us to, like, I imagine different things work for different people. Do you have any kind of top practices that tend to work?
Yeah. So I started out as a practitioner, but then I became a researcher and I developed a scale and started research. And then about 15 years ago, I met my colleague, Chris Germer. He said, Kristin, it's not enough just to research this. You need to figure out how to teach people to do it. Yeah. So we collaborated and we developed something called the Mindful Self-Compassion Program. And there's a ton of practices, I think like 40 or at least 40. There's a lot out there. I mean, there's adaptations like for athletes or for teachers or for parents. And so if you're interested, if you go to my website, selfcompassion.org, I have a lot of them like for free guided on my website. There's a lot of content out there. But a couple simple things to do, again, which don't really need training. One is, believe it or not, physical touch. So as human beings, we evolved to experience touch as a signal of care, right? So before babies have language, parents communicate care and support to the infants through touch. And our skin and our whole nervous system is evolved to respond to caring touch by feeling calm, supported, and cared for. So believe it or not, it feels weird at first, and it feels touchy-feely, but a very easy thing to do is to give yourself some sort of supportive touch. Like you put your hands on your heart, or a lot of people do this naturally without thinking of it as a self-soothing gesture, or put your hands on your face, or like hold your hand. One of the reasons this is so helpful is because your body starts to calm down first, right? Your heart rate variability increases, cortisol, inflammation decreases, and that can actually help your mind follow. If your body feels cared for, then it's a little easier to come with the mental language. So that's for the body. And then in terms of what types of things to say to yourself, internal dialogue, it's actually quite easy. You can just think, what would I say to someone I really cared about who was going through the exact same situation I'm going through? So imagine my friend or my partner or my child. What if they were experiencing this exact thing? What would I naturally say to them, to show my care? You know what to say. Probably come pretty easily. And then you can just try it out with yourself. And it feels awkward at first. It feels unnatural. You may feel like you're faking it. But remember, it's not like positive affirmations. You're just saying that you intend to care, that you want the best for yourself. Right? I'm so sorry you're going through this. Is there anything I can do to help? I'm here for you. I believe in you. Those types of warm, supportive, caring language that you would naturally use to a friend, if you say it to yourself, it has the same effect. Believe it or not, in that moment, it has the same effect of helping you calm down, helping you be more resilient, helping you feel more supported to get through the difficult stuff, to motivate change. It's not rocket science. It's really not.
Yeah. I've found myself, in more recent times with this understanding around removing my identity as like the who am I from my so the learning about our minds and our bodies and our neurochemistry and states that we get in. So and then understanding that situations, environments, and experiences create a shift in our nervous system. Now, my nervous system is not me. It's this mechanism within my body and mind that then changes my perception of the world. So removing the me from the middle of that and going, has made it a lot more palatable for me to understand some of these things and go, okay, I can engage in X, Y, Z. Like that whole reparenting. I've done reparenting processes, and I guess when we go, I'm doing this for, it feels weird. Some of these practices you do feel super weird, and you're like, what even is that? But then when you feel a shift in your emotions and your physiology, and realize that actually my physiology is a thing that changes my perception and helps me wrap stories around things. Well, I can change my story if I play with these strategies and tools. And I don't know, for me, it's made it more palatable, and it's made a huge difference. And it's weird. I think it takes years to kind of build an understanding around all of this stuff.
Yeah, well, it does. But, you know, again, at the very simplest level, it's just caring.
Yeah.
You're just cultivating care for yourself, really wanting well for yourself. You're wanting to be kind of a sense of warmth, of love, kindness, you know, beneficence, benevolence. Maybe that's the word I wanted. But yeah. So really, it's quite simple if you think about it. It helps to understand it, but if you don't, you can still care. You can say, I'm a mess. I don't understand my patterns. I don't know how it works, but you know, it hurts. And when I hurt, can I be there for myself and wish myself well and offer that sense of, you know, again, listening to ourselves, right? Really kind of validating the fact that it's hard. Feeling that instead of working against ourselves by judging ourselves, being cold to ourselves, blaming ourselves, really having a more helpful attitude. I care. What do you need right now? You're really asking yourself the question, what do I need right now? Well, a lot of people never ask that question. So when you take a more caring, warm, supportive attitude, it even if you don't understand, even if it does feel weird, it's like, okay, so it feels weird. Okay, I don't really understand. It's all right. It's only human.
Yeah,
I'm not the only one who feels this way. So part of what happens is we somehow think that everyone else in the world has got their shit together. You know, they aren't having problems. Everything's going swimmingly for them. And it's just me who's struggling, or just me who's failed, or just me who's made that mistake. It's a complete misperception. Being human by definition means being flawed.
Yeah.
You know, people don't say it's only human when you get it right. They say it's only human when you get it wrong, right? That is the human condition. We aren't robots. And so just remembering our shared humanity, that we aren't alone. But when we do that, what happens is we feel really scared when we feel isolated, that evolutionarily, we think we're going to be kicked out of the group, or we're going to be left alone to die. It's really quite frightening. But when we remember, actually, we are part of the group. This is what it means to be human. I'm not alone. There's nothing wrong with me for experiencing this or feeling this. This is what happens when human beings get in situations like these. You know, and when we can kind of let go of that sense of isolation and separateness and feel our connection to this larger whole, and add in the warmth of kindness. And again, being present instead of just trying to think about it, actually being present with what is and being present with all our emotions. It actually allows us to, first of all, in and of itself, it feels a lot better to experience loving, connected presence than it does to feel shame, isolation, and judgment, right? Just the shift in mindset in and of itself leads to more health and well-being. And then you add in how productive this kind of useful mindset is in terms of making productive changes in your life. Then you're just adding on bonus to your ability to achieve health and well-being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I love what you said a little bit earlier about the touch. And I've talked about it recently with a couple of friends. I've mentioned it, and I've gotten curious about it because I went for a massage recently, and, you know, I lay on the table and I'm tired. You know, like, I live alone. I'm very guarded. I grew up in an environment where I was sexually abused as a child for quite a few years. So there's all this rubbish around that. And I lay on the bed, and they put the wet, warm towel on your feet and just press their thumbs in. And I think the last couple of times I've just gone, oh, you know, like, I've just that feeling of like, oh, somebody's hands on my feet. And then it made me think about the sport of boxing and how this boxing environment became this kind of family and this place that I could be a part of something, and that I have this coach, this figure that teaches me and takes me under his wing and shows me and empowers me. But also there's human contact, which sounds weird because we're getting punched in the face, but also even just in the adjusting and being taught movement with your body. And so there's this boundary setting of allowing someone to manipulate your body and how you use it, but also in a way that allows you to protect yourself. Like, there's all of these thoughts go through my mind. I don't even know what point I'm making yet, but I just think of that. I'm interested in, I guess, the science of human touch, nervous system to nervous system, whatever the context. So that is really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about, because you're a boxer. My latest book is Fierce Self-Compassion, especially for women, because gender role socialization means that people socialize. I'm not talking about gender identity, anything, just like socialization. People who are socialized as girls are not supposed to be fighters. We aren't supposed to get angry. We aren't supposed to protect ourselves. We're supposed to be like, just not rock the boat and just go along and help other people. And that really means, but by the way, people socialized as boys and men, they're equally, they aren't allowed to be sensitive. They're bullied if they're too sensitive. And so we all need both to be fierce and tender, but the way we're raised means, half of the population is fierce, half the population is tender. We can't be both. And it really messes with all of us.
Yeah.
So I also wonder if part of, I call it like mama bear self-compassion, that fear, self-protection. That's part of love. You want to see someone get angry, you threaten a mama bear's cubs, right? That's natural. That desire for self-protection is a form of self-compassion.
Yeah.
So it also makes me wonder if part of what drew you to it, especially given your history, is this is a way you could love yourself. By standing up for yourself, by protecting yourself. You were actually caring for yourself by developing that side of you. And so it's so much more complex than we think it is.
Big time. The art of the sport itself, brought my history into my awareness. So that I'd tucked that very deep away and never thought about it. And then it was within a couple of years of boxing, I noticed it surface. But what was interesting to me was there was a 3-year period of not competing. I'd injured myself and I'd become a coach and was launching my own business. So there was a 3-year period I didn't compete in boxing. And within that 3-year period, I'd done quite a bit of therapy around the stuff, the work. And I remember in starting the work, I thought to myself, because I loved the boxing and I'd done really well in that first couple of years. And I went, well, some of these traits as a boxer are, you can't change one thing in one area and not change. Like if I flick the switch on dissociation, on the inability to feel in the boxing ring, which is a strength, you can just come at me. I don't feel the punches. I don't feel emotions. I don't feel angry in there. My emotions come up 2 days later. So I'm quite fierce and I have a poker face when I'm in there. I was like, okay, that's great. But if I go and sit in the therapy room and I work on how to feel my emotions and get in touch with my body, well, that's going to change Tiffanee Cook, the boxer. So do I want to be a healthy human or do I want to be a great boxer? And 3 years later, my first session back to training with my coach, and I went in and we did some sparring with one of the boys, and I jumped in. I hadn't sparred for ages, and it was a dark, dingy gym, and there were dudes everywhere, and I was like, oh, this is quite intimidating. And for the first time, I felt like I relate the feeling to being naked in front of everybody. I felt emotions, and I felt fear and anxiety, but also throughout those first few months or even longer, that year of training and fighting, I had this new level of challenge of self-care. So I wasn't willing to do anything you throw at me in training if I feel that it is unnecessarily going to hurt me, whereas before I wouldn't question it. And all of a sudden I had more of a challenge in the committing and walking into punches in order to land them. It was like, I want to land them, but all of a sudden I care about me getting hit. And I didn't I didn't think I didn't care. I didn't have a self-hatred attitude. It
Right.
wasn't on my radar, and then all of a sudden it was. So it was this bittersweet kind of, oh, that's really amazing for me. Super annoying as a boxer.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so it may be that, yeah, so it may be that there are some circumstances, like maybe a top level boxer, where you maybe compartmentalization is actually helpful in the moment.
Mm.
I do think, though, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. But it does seem to me that even if in the moment it's helpful to compartmentalize. So it's a different situation, but like I teach self-compassion to doctors. Like I taught it at a children's hospital, a lot of stress.
Mm.
When they're doing their job, they have to compartmentalize. You can't treat like a child who has cancer when you're thinking about the suffering and pain of the parents. So in the moment, sometimes you do have to just focus or shove that out.
Mm.
But when you aren't in that moment, so when you're out of the boxing ring, you do have to process it. Otherwise, it is going to be harmful to you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's necessarily that it would make you not as an effective boxer. Maybe you'd have to just strategize when you process your emotions in a way that's more effective. Whereas if you never process them, that's also going to come back and bite you.
Yes.
But yeah, when you're in the ring, maybe it is more useful. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you would know the answer to that better than me, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Um,
It's definitely a space I love to play. I get a lot of reflection and self-awareness, and
yeah.
I felt there were not many places that could bring me so into the moment and so into my body as to learn about myself as the boxing ring did, which was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you have been amazing to speak to. So you've written, how many books have you written? Just the one or?
4, actually. Well, 2 of them I co-wrote with Chris Germer. So we have the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, which has all the exercises we've developed.
Yep.
And we have a program for people who want to teach this to others. And then I have my self-compassion book, which is kind of the first book, more the basics, and then Fierce Self-Compassion, which is this more mama bear side that people don't immediately think of, but which is really an important part of self-compassion. So
I love it. I will get my hands on them. I will have your website in the show notes. And are you on socials?
yes, Instagram and Facebook.
Fantastic.
So I mean, I've got a great social media person, and I've got a mailing list, and we send out tips and exercises and quotes and all those things. So there's a pretty big community of practice now. It's nice.
Everybody, sign up, especially if you are doing my programs. Sign up. We always talk about Kristin Neff. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It's actually been really interesting conversation. I appreciate you're being so honest and sharing.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.